Hello, friends, and happy Friday. I hope you're having a great day so far. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about how to maintain your center in the face of pushback, because one essential skill needed to be a gender creative leader is the ability to maintain your center, regardless of what's going on around you, and especially in the face of pushback, because we are going to encounter a tremendous amount of pushback. And so we really need to be prepared for that. And one sign of a powerful leader is your ability to set the tone in the world around you and to maintain that regardless, rather than just reacting to life and being pulled this way and that. And this is an aspect that I talked about on Monday regarding the example of MLK, his ability to stay connected to his inherent sense of worth and his mission and his message in the midst of very high pressure situations, from being physically assaulted and emotionally threatened to meeting with presidents in the White House. And we also saw that this week in the example of Nathan Phillips, the ability to stay strong and calm in the midst of being harassed. And that is true leadership, in my opinion. So let's just check in a little bit. How good are you at maintaining your center generally, even when not in a leadership position? So for instance, if somebody cuts you off in traffic, then how do you respond? Are you able to stay calm and centered? Or do you have a backlog of unprocessed emotions just below the surface that come surging forth when something or someone pushes your buttons? Maybe you have a lot of underlying rage about how gender creative people are treated in society, or about how much of a struggle that life has been for you. Because one aspect of feeling unsafe in life is being easily triggered. And when triggered, then we can lash out. Maybe you shout at the other driver about what an idiot they are. We tend to feel vulnerable. And when we feel vulnerable, then we feel guarded and threatened often, maybe even without realizing it. And so if life and people feel inherently threatening to you, then you are probably walking through life on guard, which is exhausting. And so having someone cut you off in traffic perhaps prompts a stronger reaction than what is warranted by the situation. And how about if someone critiques you at work? Are you able to gracefully receive this critique without having it impact your inherent sense of worth? Or do you perhaps get defensive, maybe even explosive? Do you go into shame and insecurity? Maybe you covertly bond with others against the person who has critiqued you, trying to cover over your own feelings of embarrassment. Or maybe you create a scenario where people have to take sides in order to demonstrate their loyalty to you so that you can be reassured of your competence and your value. How about when someone rejects you romantically? Does it make you want to hide under the covers and never give love a try again? Does some part of you rehearse all the times that you've not been met in love previously? Maybe you tell yourself bitterly, see, this always happens. Does it stir in you feelings or fears of not being lovable or of always being alone? And how about when your romance is blossoming? Are you still able to stay calmly in your center? Or do you fly off into fantasy land, dreaming and obsessing over your new romance, surging with the adrenaline rush of love and attraction? Because positive events and emotions can just as easily cause us to jump ship and abandon our center and to look for our validation and worth from outside of ourselves. And finally, what about when someone disagrees with you politically, which is a pretty common occurrence these days? Do you find it threatening or invalidating of your viewpoint or your personhood? Does it fill you full of rage or maybe make you want to cry and hide? Maybe this week, with the transgender military ban, maybe there's been a whole new round of debates in your circles about the validity of trans people's lives. And maybe you've noticed a lot of bodily tension as a result. Maybe some tight muscles or jaw clenching, maybe some headaches. Maybe it's triggering for you ways that you feel objectified or fetishized or dehumanized as a gender creative person. The ways that you are just a projection screen for other people's fears and fantasies. Maybe it's made you feel powerless and victimized, or angry and resentful, or hopeless and despairing. Maybe you just feel physically and emotionally exhausted. Because it is very exhausting when you are bouncing around from emotion to emotion with no stable center to ground yourself. Then you're something like a pinball. So you brush up against a surface and that becomes electrified and it spirals you off in another direction, where you brush up against another surface and that becomes electrified and that spirals you off in another direction. And this is really the essence of being a victim, because you're just reacting to life rather than being the creator of your own and other people's realities. And this is very energy intensive and is the opposite of the kind of self-mastery that we see in somebody like MLK. And so if you feel like you are living in this way and it is taking its toll and you feel ready for a change, then reach out and I can help you with what is causing this state of reactivity. Because it is not inevitable, even in our highly unstable and very enraging current political environment. So usually when we have strong emotions just below the surface that are easily triggered by the range of frustrating and disappointing or even happy circumstances around us, it tends to be due to the backlog of unresolved trauma and unprocessed emotions from our past that does truly block our joy and our peace of mind and our ability to see clearly in the present. And this is really the saddest aspect of it, because if we don't attend to the events and emotions accumulated in our past, they do dictate our unconscious expectations in the present, and therefore doom us to recreate the past over and over and over again in a dysfunctional attempt to try to make peace with it. And so if you are stuck in this loop, then please reach out, because I can get you out of that terrible cycle. And what about when we fall out of our center? Because that is inevitable from time to time. So how do we get back? What is in your toolkit? And how deep is it? Because depending on the context and the situation, it often does require more than one tool to find our way back. Oftentimes it takes several tools in a row until we could really fully get back to our center, depending on how strong our emotional reaction has been. And so how long does it take you to notice that you have fallen out of your center? Depending on how strongly that you were triggered, you might be off and running and not even notice for quite some time that you have abandoned yourself. And once we realize, then how can we move through our bodies, whatever has arisen, so that it doesn't become stuck within us? And this is a particular challenge, I think, for gender creative people, because being in our bodies can be so challenging just to begin with. And so let's do a little experiment. And Maddie, you can join me for this. Welcome for being here. So just check in with your body right now. And just see, is there any stiffness in your neck? Any clenching in your jaw? Any furrowing in your brow? And this is often anger. And if we don't release this emotion from our bodies, then it generally comes out in some other kind of way. And usually in some kind of passive-aggressive kind of punishment, which is often directed towards a different target than the source of our anger, usually where we feel safest directing it, including oftentimes that means at ourselves. And so if you've identified the presence of anger, then let's release it together. We're just going to do this for a minute as a fun experiment. So this is great. This is really great to try. For instance, if someone cuts you off in the car. So instead of blaring your horn or flipping them off, then just try simply gripping the steering wheel and just shouting, "Ah!" Right? Putting as much energy and sound into it as possible. So let's go ahead and try that together. So gather up whatever anger energy that you have found, and let's just do that together. Ah! Okay, so instead of blasting your anger at another driver, at another person, then you can just imagine that you are blasting the toxicity of anger out of your own body and out of your own mind. Kind of similar to the ways that, forgiveness really is a gift for ourselves, more than for the other person. And so to be released from our bodies, it doesn't require being directed at anything. All we need to do is simply release the energy from our bodies. And I'll talk some more maybe next week, do another Facebook Live more about what happens to emotions when they get stuck in our bodies and how we can better release that. Because really, the main tool that we've been given by US culture is just repress. Stuff it down, engage in a whole variety of dysfunctional addictions to try to be able to numb ourselves from that, basically. So if this was helpful to you and you are recognizing that perhaps you are needing some more tools in your toolbox than you currently have, then that's another great reason to send me a private message and see if working together feels like the right match. And welcome Jess also, who's going to be watching later. Yeah, I meant to mention before we were doing the anger release that that would be good to do if you were in a private location, not necessarily when you're at work. Although you can do it in your imagination. I've done it with my students, and kind of building courage to be able to make sound. And we do some anger release kind of also hitting pillows, which always ends up being their favorite class of the whole semester, just because it feels so incredibly good and empowering just to get all that out of our bodies. But I have them kind of screaming at the top of their lungs in their imaginations first to build some courage before actually making a sound, because we can be very shy and self-conscious about making a sound. And especially those of us who grew up in family environments similar to mine, where with my mom, where there was a lot of anger expressed in the environment that was destructive, then it can also be upsetting and intimidating to even be around people making loud sounds or to be able to make loud sounds ourselves. So sometimes it could take some practice, which is why it's great to do in places like if you're in your car and you're by yourself, because nobody can even know what's going on. Okay, so next week I'm going to follow up on this theme and do another Facebook Live on does life feel like a battleground? Because I just know so many of us are struggling with this feeling. And then probably the second one next week will be on dealing with strong emotions, since they are so incredibly activated in our cultural environment right now. And before that, however, I'm going to do my next video in response to the negative comments on the ad for this group. And that is about what it is that gender creative people know and why we are meant to be important leaders and teachers. And so that will be over the weekend, probably tomorrow. And thanks very much for your patience with scheduling as I'm figuring out how best to run a Facebook group. So, I mentioned before, I think I mentioned before that Myers-Briggs temperament-wise, I am an INFP, which means, and especially as a spiritual person and somebody who lived in South Africa for a couple of years, time is somewhat fluid and relative to me. And so it would be great, I think, probably to have my Facebook Lives on a regular schedule so that you know when to tune into them. We can create some unities. I am working on that. They tend to come to me in a more of a organic fashion and tend to be scheduled in when I have time and privacy to be able to do them. You may have noticed in the MLK video that my cat had several solos, so they tend to like to get on when I'm doing these, which can be distracting. So anyhow, yeah, thanks for your patience and for tuning in when you are able to. Maddie, I didn't know if you wanted to share anything about your experience, if you did the little anger release, or if you have any reflections about how to maintain your center in the face of pushback, or any particular help that you are needing with particular pushback that you are feeling right now. So I'll pause for a moment to see if you want to respond. And in the meantime, happy Friday. Don't forget to post your wins for the week so that we can all celebrate with you, and have a wonderful weekend. And I will check in with you soon for the next video.